Zuri woke up in the heart of Zambasa, the warm morning sun streaming through her bedroom window. Today was her 35th birthday, and she felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. She had always dreamed of this day being special. Her husband, Jabari, had promised a big surprise party, and his words had filled her with so much joy. She smiled as she looked at the small photo of them on the bedside table, the two of them laughing together on a trip years ago. She believed they were still that happy couple. She got up early, humming her favourite song as she cleaned the living room. She polished every surface until it sparkled, rearranged the cushions just the way Jabari liked them, and placed fresh flowers in a vase by the entrance. She moved with so much love and care, imagining how surprised he and the guests would be when they saw the house looking so beautiful. She even wore the special dress Jabari had once complimented her on, hoping it would remind him of the woman he fell in love with. All day, Zuri kept busy in the kitchen, preparing snacks and hanging bright balloons that swayed with every breeze. She checked her phone every few minutes, smiling at each birthday message from friends and family, but it was Jabari's call she was waiting for most. When he finally rang to say, "Everything is going perfectly, be ready for the best night of your life," her heart leapt with happiness. She stood by the mirror, practicing her smile, daydreaming about him walking through the door with a cake and their loved ones cheering. Every time she caught her reflection, she whispered, "Happy birthday, Zuri," reminding herself how far she had come in life, how much she deserved this joy. She pictured an evening filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of the people who loved her. In her mind, the night was going to be perfect. She never imagined that the biggest surprise of her life was just around the corner, and it wasn't at all what she had been dreaming of. The evening had arrived, and guests began filling the house with cheerful chatter. The living room sparkled with the decorations Zuri had lovingly put up, and everyone kept asking where the birthday girl was. Zuri stood by the door, eyes shining, waiting for Jabari to appear so they could start the celebration. Every time the door creaked open, her heart beat faster. She wanted the moment to be perfect. Finally, Jabari arrived. The crowd fell silent, expecting him to walk in with a cake or flowers. But instead, he strode in confidently with a tall man in a dark suit by his side, his lawyer. Confusion spread across the guests' faces. Zuri's smile froze as Jabari stood in front of her, eyes cold and voice sharp. He pulled out an envelope, handed it to her, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Zuri, I'm divorcing you. I'm leaving you for someone who actually makes me happy." Gasps filled the room. Zuri's hands shook as she opened the papers. Her heart felt like it had been stabbed. The guests exchanged horrified looks. No one knew what to do. Jabari didn't stop there. He added with cruel satisfaction, "I've been seeing my secretary for months. I'm done pretending with you." Tears welled in Zuri's eyes as her dreams of a magical birthday shattered before everyone's eyes. The party had become her worst nightmare. The room went completely silent. It felt like even the music had stopped breathing. All the guests stood frozen, their eyes darting from Jabari's cold face to Zuri's pale, shocked expression. A few people started whispering to each other, their voices low but sharp, like tiny knives cutting through the tense air. Some guests looked down, embarrassed to be there, while others stared openly, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Zuri's best friend, Amina, was the first to move. She pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around Zuri, whispering, I'm here," as Zuri's whole body shook with silent sobs. But Jabari didn't even flinch. He looked around the room with a smug smirk and raised his voice so everyone could hear. "What are you all staring at?" he snapped. "The party isn't over. Stay and enjoy yourselves." A horrified murmur spread through the guests. Some looked like they wanted to leave immediately, but Jabari's harsh tone made them freeze. Amina glared at him, eyes full of fury, but she kept holding Zuri tightly. Zuri felt like the walls were closing in. Her beautiful decorations, the balloons she had hung with so much hope, now looked twisted and mocking. She couldn't breathe. With a strangled cry, Zuri pulled away from Amina and ran up the stairs. The guests parted like a wave around her. She barely made it to her room before collapsing to the floor, tears pouring down her face. Every dream she had for this day, every hope, was shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. Downstairs, the awkward silence stretched on. The guests caught between the cruel command of a heartless husband and the raw heartbreak of a woman who had given everything for love. Moments after Zuri locked herself in her room, a knock sounded at the door. A delivery man appeared, pushing in a cart carrying a luxurious 3-tier cake. It was grand and elegant, decorated in white and shimmering gold, with delicate sugar flowers cascading down the sides. The guests stared in awe. For a second, the beauty of the cake almost made them forget the nightmare they had just witnessed. But the truth hung heavy in the air. This wasn't any cake. It was the one Zuri had ordered weeks ago as a surprise for her own birthday. She had spent days choosing the perfect design, wanting it to be a symbol of love, hope, and celebration. It was meant to be the highlight of her special night, something to share with her husband and friends. But now, instead of joy, the cake arrived like a cruel joke. Jabari stepped forward arrogantly, smoothing his shirt as he scanned the room. He smiled, not kindly, but like he was enjoying every second of Zuri's humiliation. "Well," he said loudly, clapping his hands together, "since the cake is here, we might as well not waste it." His voice was sharp, each word stabbing deeper into the hearts of the guests. He motioned for everyone to gather around the cake. A few people hesitated, looking up the stairs as if hoping Zuri would come down. But Jabari's cold eyes made it clear he wouldn't allow it. He picked up the silver knife, twirling it between his fingers like it was part of a show. "Let's cut the cake," he announced, as if nothing had happened. Some guests forced nervous smiles, terrified of crossing Jabari, while others looked uncomfortable and whispered among themselves. The once joyful decorations now felt like a cage. The music playing in the background sounded empty and hollow. The smell of frosting filled the room, but it was sickeningly sweet under the weight of betrayal. As Jabari posed next to the cake, ready to cut it without the woman it was meant for, the guests realized this party had become something else entirely, a twisted performance, a display of cruelty that none of them would ever forget. Upstairs, Zuri could hear the muffled sounds of laughter, mixed with uneasy silence, each note breaking her heart a little more. Jabari held the knife high and sliced into the middle layer of the beautiful cake. The crowd leaned forward, some trying to look supportive, others just curious about what would happen next. But as he pulled the knife back for the second cut, something unexpected happened. A small envelope, hidden deep inside the cake, tumbled out and landed on the table with a soft thud. A collective gasp spread through the guests like a wave. Jabari froze, his hand still on the knife. His eyes widened in confusion as everyone stared at the mysterious envelope, its white paper now smudged with bits of frosting. Amina stepped forward quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She picked up the envelope with shaking hands, wiped the icing off the front, and looked around at the guests who were now silent and hanging on every breath. Slowly she opened it and unfolded the papers inside. Her eyes widened as she read the words, her voice trembling. It's Zuri's father's will," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. He left instructions that on her 35th birthday, she would inherit $20 million, several properties across the city, and, oh my God, full ownership of Jabari's company. A stunned silence fell over the room, followed by a chorus of shocked gasps. All eyes snapped back to Jabari, whose face had turned pale as chalk. His lips parted, but no words came out. A few guests began whispering furiously. They realized the truth. Jabari had tried to humiliate Zuri and divorce her right before she became the richest, most powerful person in the room, and the owner of everything he thought he controlled. Amina held the papers like a shield of truth, her voice growing more confident as she repeated the will's final lines. Some guests started to smile, seeing justice unfolding before their eyes. Others just shook their heads in disbelief. The cake, once a symbol of betrayal, had revealed the secret that would change everything. And upstairs, Zuri, still crying, had no idea that her life had just taken the most incredible turn. Jabari's mouth opened and closed, like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. His face went from red with anger to pale as if all the blood had drained away. His confident, smug expression disappeared completely, replaced by pure panic. The guests, who just minutes before had looked at him with pity or confusion, now stared at him with wide eyes full of shock and growing disgust. It was like a light had switched on in everyone's minds. They realized exactly what Jabari had tried to do. He had planned the divorce to humiliate Zuri and avoid sharing the inheritance he somehow knew was coming. He thought he could walk away with his freedom and his mistress, leaving Zuri heartbroken and alone. But instead, he had been caught in his own cruel trap, and everyone could see it. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. People began shaking their heads, some folding their arms in anger. A few guests who had been friendly with Jabari before now stepped back like they didn't want to be anywhere near him. Others looked upstairs, clearly wishing they could go comfort Zuri. The truth had changed everything. Zuri wasn't the helpless woman Jabari thought he could throw away. She was now the owner of his company and every property he had ever bragged about, and he was completely powerless. Jabari tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a weak, choked sound. This must be a mistake, he stammered, reaching for the will in Amina's hands. But Amina pulled it away, glaring at him with eyes full of fury. Guests began to murmur things like, "He's finished, and he deserves this." Even the lawyer, who had come with Jabari, looked embarrassed, quietly stepping away from him. The room's atmosphere shifted from awkward tension to righteous outrage. The guests no longer felt sorry for Jabari. They were disgusted by his betrayal. And in that moment, everyone understood. Jabari had lost everything, and Zuri, the woman he tried to break, now held all the power, including every single one of his debts. The guests were still buzzing with shock when the sound of quiet footsteps came from the stairs. Heads turned, and conversations stopped instantly. Zuri appeared, stepping into the room with her head held high. Her eyes were still red from crying, but her back was straight, and her face was calm and regal, like a queen reclaiming her throne. She looked more powerful in that moment than anyone had ever seen her. A hush fell over the room as Zuri slowly scanned the faces of everyone present. Then she smiled, a small, confident smile that said she was no longer the woman who had run upstairs in tears. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice clear and strong. It rang out across the room, silencing even the faintest whispers. "I know this evening didn't go as expected, but I want you to know how grateful I am for each of you being here." She walked forward gracefully, her eyes locking on Jabari, who was still frozen near the cake. "I've spent years giving everything I had to this marriage, believing in love, believing in him," she said, her voice rising with each word. "But tonight, I realized something important. It's time to renovate my life, just like I decorated this house today. And that starts with removing what's broken." The crowd watched in stunned silence. Zuri took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with strength. "Jabari," she said, her voice turning ice cold, "you're fired from the company, effective immediately. The business you tried to steal is now mine, and you will never set foot in it again." A moment of shocked silence hung in the air, then erupted into loud applause. Some guests even cheered, clapping their hands with relief and excitement. Amina rushed to Zuri's side, hugging her tightly as tears of pride filled her eyes. Jabari looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his face pale and eyes wide with disbelief. He opened his mouth but couldn't find any words. Zuri stood tall in the middle of the room, no longer the heartbroken wife, but a woman reborn. The guests couldn't stop clapping. They were witnessing something extraordinary, the transformation of a woman who had been betrayed into one who now held all the power, and they knew they'd never forget it. Jabari stood in the middle of the room, his hands shaking as he reached out to Zuri. His face was pale, his eyes wild with panic. "Zuri, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I made a mistake. Let's talk about this. We can fix it. I still love you." His words tumbled out in a desperate rush, but they sounded hollow and pathetic against the strength that now radiated from Zuri. For a brief second, the room was quiet, everyone watching to see what Zuri would do. Then someone in the back let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Another guest joined in, and soon soft giggles spread through the crowd. The sound grew until people were openly laughing at Jabari, their faces full of disbelief that he thought he could just say sorry and erase everything he had done. Jabari's eyes darted around wildly as the laughter filled the room. His shoulders slumped as he realized no one was on his side anymore. Even friends who used to admire him were shaking their heads or whispering to each other with disgust. The lawyer he brought stood stiffly by the door, clearly wanting nothing more to do with him. Zuri stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "You chose this, Jabari," she said softly but firmly. "You thought you could betray me and walk away without consequences. Now you have to live with the choices you made." Her words were like a final blow, cutting through whatever hope he had left. With no job, no home, because the house now belonged fully to Zuri, and no support from anyone in the room, Jabari realized he had lost everything. His eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide. He turned and stumbled toward the door, trying to hold on to what little dignity he had left. But as he walked out, the laughter of the guests followed him like a cruel echo. By the time he stepped into the night, word of what had happened was already spreading through Zambasa. Messages flew from phone to phone, telling the story of the man who tried to destroy his wife, only to end up alone, humiliated, and ruined. And as Jabari disappeared down the dark street, everyone in the room knew his downfall had only just begun. The days after that unforgettable night were not easy for Zuri, but they were full of hope. With Jabari gone and the truth out, she could finally breathe. Amina stayed by her side every single day, helping her sort through the paperwork and comforting her when the pain of betrayal tried to pull her down again. Zuri also met often with her late father's lawyer, an elderly man with kind eyes who guided her through every detail of her new inheritance and responsibilities. Slowly, Zuri started to see beyond her heartbreak. She remembered the nights she'd cried thinking about women like her, women who had given everything to their husbands only to be left with nothing. She knew she wanted to use her new power to help them. One afternoon, sitting in her father's old study, she made a decision that would change countless lives. She announced she would donate a big part of her inheritance to a women's shelter in Zambasa, a place that took in women and children who had nowhere else to go. When the news spread, people across the city celebrated her kindness. But Zuri didn't stop there. She used another part of the money to invest in small businesses run by women who had big dreams but little support. She met them one by one, listening to their stories, offering advice, and giving them the resources they needed to succeed. Many of these women had been through their own heartbreaks, and Zuri's faith in them made them believe in themselves again. She also founded a charity specifically for single mothers, providing them with childcare, education, and skills training so they could build better lives for themselves and their children. She named it the Phoenix Foundation, to remind every woman that it's possible to rise from the ashes stronger than ever. Soon, stories about Zuri's generosity and strength were on every news channel, in every newspaper, and all over social media. People who had never met her felt inspired by her courage. Zuri's own life blossomed as she poured her heart into helping others. She renovated her home, not just with new paint and furniture, but with love, filling it with laughter, friends, and late-night conversations about dreams and possibilities. Amina became not only her best friend, but also her partner in the foundation, and together they grew it into something that touched thousands of lives. Zuri's story spread far beyond Zambasa. Women across the country began to reach out to her, thanking her for giving them hope. She showed everyone that even when life tries to break you, you can stand back up, stronger and wiser, and turn your pain into power. And every time she looked in the mirror, Zuri saw not the woman who was betrayed, but the woman who had transformed heartbreak into a new beginning. The grand hall was filled with warm light and soft music as people gathered for the relaunch of Zuri's father's foundation. Guests mingled around beautiful flower arrangements and displays showing the stories of women whose lives had been changed by Zuri's work. There was a new energy in the air, full of hope and excitement. At the front of the room stood a shining stage with a tall, elegant cake, this time not a symbol of betrayal, but of new beginnings. When it was time, Zuri stepped up to the podium. She looked stunning, her eyes bright and her smile wide. As the room quieted, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "Sometimes life breaks you," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying over the hushed crowd. "But it's only because it's getting ready to crown you." People leaned in, hanging on every word. So, stand tall. Your story isn't over yet. Mine wasn't, and neither is yours. The audience erupted in applause, some wiping away tears. Zuri's words had touched everyone, reminding them that pain doesn't have to be the end, but can be the start of something beautiful. She walked over to the cake, lifted the knife with a steady hand, and cut the first slice, her smile glowing brighter than ever. From a distance, outside the bright lights of the celebration, Jabari stood in the shadows watching her. His face was pale, eyes hollow, realizing fully what he had lost. But Zuri didn't spare him a glance. She was surrounded by love and support, stronger and happier than she had ever been, ready to write the next chapter of her life on her own terms.